Hello, welcome back to Marathon Man, where I'm going through Doctor Who from the very beginning, and you join me at the final batch of missing episodes. As fans, we tend to use hyperbole quite a lot when it comes to appraising Doctor Who, and maybe that comes from having to mount impassioned defences to non-believers, that when it comes to discourse with fellow fans, we tend to carry over a lot of emotive pronouncements. Our favourite stories come dripping in superlatives, and then our least favourite ones end up being doused in poison. It's awful! It's terrible! It's like somebody came into your house unannounced and then poured water all in the tin that you keep your sugar in, so now all your sugar's ruined, except it wasn't water, it was wee, and there wasn't any sugar in there anyway, so they pooed in it and then just weed all over the poo. I've been a Doctor Who fan for a long time, and I don't think I've ever seen anyone say that they liked the Space Pirates. Now, maybe I've not been looking hard enough, it's not really a story I feel strongly enough about, to be honest. But that said, I've never actually thought it was as deserving of all of the bile that people cover it with. It's fine. It's not brilliant. It's probably not even good, but it's certainly not terrible. And on marathons, surprises will always come along. And on this one, I've been taken aback, for example, by how much I loved the Savages. But this had always been my opinion of the Space Pirates. It was alright. Till this time. Now, yet again, it feels like it's got a different flavour from what came before. With Season 5 still feeling like it had stamped a bit of a framework onto Doctor Who, this does feel a little bit like a boon, and it does give Season 6 a massive sense of variety. It also feels quite unique for the Troughton era as well. It's got a space opera vibe going on, like a western in space 8 years before Star Wars. And therefore, it's it can feel a little bit like a later Pertwee story, or a Tom story, or even a Davison or Colin one. Not that this makes it good by itself, of course, but it is most certainly a change of tack, which is always going to feel even like a tiny bit refreshing at this point in Doctor Who's life. It's been going for 6 years at this point, and for one of those, it arguably peddled exactly the same thing. So with the Space Pirates, it adds yet another string to its bow. That this comes towards the end of an era which is then replaced by an even more static one in terms of location, it only adds to the Space Pirates' slightly anomalous feel. And it being the most missing story in Season 6 only holds it back a little bit more and gives it a kind of black sheep status, which only, I think, affects the way people see it. I really want this story back. I mean, I want all of them back, of course, but I think I'd like this one back just to see what it would do to its reputation. And even if that is just a slight amendment, I mean, if it's as good with the visuals as I think it would be, then it's still just average Doctor Who, but who knows, it could be even better. But it doesn't have most of its visuals, and in the past, while that hasn't stopped me from defending it quite strongly, without ever thinking it was actually brilliant, this time I wonder whether or not it contributed to it feeling like hard work for me. I have had an alright time with this story before, but this time I did feel myself slowly being pulled across the floor to join the camp which, think it's crap. What I'm trying to say is that I don't think it has nearly none of the advantages of a lot of 1960s Doctor Who. It's missing, and it doesn't really conform to any other story type around at the time. Sure, the Mythmakers is missing, but fantastic performances and script aside, I think we can almost judge the Mythmakers based on the other historical productions around at the time. The Space Pirates already feels like an anomaly, so what can we use as a litmus test other than the existing episode 2? So much easier to just say it's which, like I say, I actually found myself starting to wonder if it actually was this time around. I get it, basically. Even when I thought it was being harsh, I still got it. Some judge that it's crap based on what they can hear, the stills that remain, and that existing episode 2, whereas I've just always reached a different conclusion. Because there is stuff that I enjoy here, even on this viewing. I even like Milo Clancy and his bizarre Jimmy Stewart voice. And yeah, sure, his accent is all over the place, but it's almost as if he's been put there on purpose by Robert Holmes to remind people that this is meant to be a bit of fun. Now, after impressing with the admittedly slightly compromised the Crotons, Robert Holmes again displays like some of that wit that he'd become famous for, and like displays wit that the type of wit that hadn't really permeated Doctor Who before his arrival.
Hey, is it alright if I blow my nose, or is that another offence?
In that one line, he's convinced me that this is meant to be a fun science fiction romp, and wishing that Clancy spoke properly is kind of missing the point. I mean, it isn't solely a piece of fluff, because Holmes manages to permeate the humour with some rather dramatic moments, like he did in The Crotons. For example, Madeline being willing to stand trial at the end is a character beat we've not really had before. The closest is probably Fewsham in the immediately preceding story, like his guilt overriding everything else as he turns against the Ice Warriors. And Madeline's stoic yet willing acceptance that she is to account for her crimes redeems her somewhat, and it's a very mature thing for the story to strive for. And Holmes also concocts some serious jeopardy for the crew. They wind up in a new sort of predicament when they find themselves stranded on a bit of an exploded space beacon. And this pickle is treated with the seriousness it deserves. They don't escape for ages, but the regulars also get some decently dark humour during their ordeal. And before that, it's a long time before they even show up in the story. Holmes takes some time in setting up the other characters and their relationships with each other. I've already mentioned how good he is at world building, and he does it well here. I mean, like, yeah, okay, so maybe the world isn't as difficult to build as others might be, but he still does it expertly. The beacons, the presence of the pirates are all set up really well. Even the Space Corps, which I like to think is the same one as in Red Dwarf, because look, Milo showing up as a philandering space pirate in an early episode of Red Dwarf really wouldn't feel out of place to me, except for the whole Lister being the last human thing, but they've found ways around that before. With like the business with the beacons, we know they are systematically being blown up from the start of the story. That means we can just plonk the Doctor, Jamie and Zoe down on one, and we know what's going to happen. Now that's not ingenious, but it's cleverer than it looks, and there's more care put into it than this story's detractors would have you believe. And this is why I feel duty-bound to stick up for underdogs like the Space Pirates. And it also is an indication of how immature I am, because I couldn't stop myself from laughing whenever they were talking about floaters. But, to be searingly honest, while I have always felt this story was unfairly maligned, and I still really don't think it's as bad as some people will make out, after the first 2 episodes this time, I did start finding it a real slog to get through. Once the Dominators is out of the way, I've always seen Season 6 as, you know, a breeze, with this story as an ever so slight wobble. And that was when I didn't much mind it. But now that this viewing has made me consider the possibility that it is, you know, crap, like everybody's been saying for years, that Season 6, once the Dominators is out of the way, is now a breeze, with this story as a definitive wobble. Yeah, it's another that doesn't really need 6 episodes, and you know, for a 6-part space opera with pirates, it doesn't half end like way too quietly. So therefore, it kind of just leaves the lasting feeling of an unsatisfying meal. With this one over, I only have one story. I mean, it's a long one, thankfully. One story left with this brilliant TARDIS crew. And even as they approach the end of their time, they're still like absolutely fantastic together. And even in this less than stellar story, when Zoe works out exactly where the HQ is for the pirates, it's another shining triumph for her as a character. She is the best companion in ages. I've always liked her, but now I love her. There's also a nice flipperoo which is indicative of Robert Holmes' sense of humour, where they have to rely on candles, and this becomes Jamie's department on account of Zoe not knowing how they work, and that's a lovely moment for the two of them, and it informs their relationship further, taking Zoe down a peg or two, giving Jamie a moment of, if you like, intellectual dominance for once, and it also happens to work as a joke. Perfect bit of script work, if you ask me. Special mention to Hermack, by the way. He's an odd presence, but in a really good way. He's interesting and has a fantastic voice. I have never ever argued for the Space Pirates to be considered a classic, but so visceral is the hatred towards it that I've always felt like I needed to stick up for it a bit. It contains a lot of fun elements and it works a lot harder than some may claim. It has brilliant moments for the regulars and further cements them as a formidable unit. But from this viewing, it does make it harder for me to keep going into bat for it, although as you can see I will still try. It doesn't really have the story to sustain 6 episodes, but its biggest crime is the fact that it doesn't exist, and it's that combination which has affected this story's reputation dramatically. Which is why I hope it comes back. I'd have loved to have liked the Space Pirates this time, but it's one of those rare stories on this marathon which has actually come down a few notches. And having now polished it off, ticking off 243 episodes of Doctor Who in the process, I now have no more missing episodes to contend with. Not really, stop being a pedant, alright? Not really. And only one more story left with the second Doctor. Luckily though, it's fantastic. The cliffhanger to episode 1. The most immediate peril I can remember the TARDIS crew being in for a good long while. With special mention to Zoe's
very rude to point, you know, especially with a gun.
I would say its length, but there are longer stories which are far stronger, next one being a case in point. So I think I'm going to say how it uses its length. 6 episodes is quite a lot for a few Doctor Who stories, but here it seems to affect the Space Pirates more than most. As ever, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this former Space Pirates defender dipping his toe in the dark side, then you know how YouTube works. Please do hit the like button and share it like mad. It really does help. And what do you think of the Space Pirates? Are you a defender as well, or is it Doctor Who at its worst? More than a defender, are you an out-and-out fan of this story? And how do you think it being found might affect its reputation? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you back here soon for some backstory bombshells that will change the show forever. So, if you don't want to miss that, hit the subscribe button, clang the cloister bell, and I'll see you for the second Doctor's swan song.